Hello and welcome back to a really long English lesson. In this English lesson, you will learn over 100 English phrasal verbs, English idioms, and advanced English vocabulary that you can use in your next English conversation. Or maybe you are preparing for the IELTS or TOEFL exam. The news is a great way to improve your English, but let's face it, they use some really large vocabulary. Over the past couple weeks, the United States has been hit by two major hurricanes. First Helene and then Milton. I have made 3 English lessons about these hurricanes and I've combined them all here for one giant English lesson. If this is your first time watching these English lessons, great. New material is always good. But if you've seen 1 or 2 or all 3, this will be great review. When learning English, it's always good to review the material you have learned. Let's get right into this English lesson, and throughout the English lesson, I will have updates about these hurricanes. In today's English lesson, we are going to watch a news clip about some recent flooding that happened in Asheville, North Carolina. During that news clip, you will hear lots of English phrasal verbs, some idioms, and some advanced vocabulary. I will explain the difficult vocabulary with pictures, definitions, and example sentences. Let's take a look at that news clip, and I'll be right back to teach some English.
People still unaccounted for following Hurricane Helene. The death toll across the southeast rising to at least 133 people. In some communities, drinking water is scarce and gas is in short supply. Just look at that long line in hard-hit Asheville, North Carolina. And that's where our Faith Abube is for us this morning. Good morning, Faith.
Yeah, good morning to you, Robin. Some people here without food, power, or water are growing desperate by the minute.
Desperate. They mentioned desperate. Take a look at that picture. That person looks desperate. When someone really needs help or is in a bad situation. Many people were desperate for food after Hurricane Helene hit Asheville. Should we take a look at a map to see where Asheville, North Carolina is? It is in the mountains. I have never been there, but I have heard that it is beautiful. Unfortunately, it sounds like at least 138 people have died as a result of Hurricane Helene. Later on in the news story, we will hear about a man, John, who has lost his wife. Very, very sad. This is what is so scary. There are many people unaccounted for. That means when someone is missing and no one knows where they are. Hopefully, it's because so many people in the area don't have power. They don't have internet. It is hard to make a phone call or send a text message. Hopefully, once power is restored, those people will be accounted for and they will be found safe and sound. Let's look at a sentence that has unaccounted for in it. Several people are still unaccounted for after the hurricane passed through the town.
People still unaccounted for following Hurricane Helene. The death toll across the southeast rising to at least 133 people.
None of this is fun to talk about, but this is especially not fun. Death toll. It means the number of people who died because something bad. The death toll from Hurricane Helene in North Carolina is still rising as rescue teams continue their search. The death toll from Hurricane Helene in North Carolina is still rising as rescue teams continue their search.
In some communities, drinking water is scarce and gas is in short supply. Just look at that long line.
Communities. These are groups of people living in the same area. And from what I have experienced, when a tragedy hits a community, those people come together, they help each other, and I hope that is what is happening in the communities that were hit by Hurricane Helene. Let's use it in a sentence. Many communities in the path of Hurricane Helene were flooded. Scarce. Scarce, it means when something is hard to find. And for the picture, I used a desert. And you can imagine in a desert, water is scarce. But let's talk about Hurricane Helene and scarce. After the hurricane, clean water became scarce in affected areas.
In some communities, drinking water is scarce and gas is in short supply. Just look at that long line.
The news clip also says in short supply. In short supply and scarce are really similar. They're almost the same. It means when there is not enough of something. In Asheville, food and clean drinking water was in short supply after the storm. And in the picture, you can see there is an empty grocery shelf. The sign says 1 per customer, meaning you could only buy one of whatever was on that shelf.
Yeah, good morning to you, Robin. Some people here without food, power, or water are growing desperate by the minute. In fact, we saw a couple of people along this road yesterday who were so desperate that they were going through the storm debris, trying to find any kitchen item they could find so they could put it over an open fire and cook something to eat.
Going through. This is a phrasal verb that can be used in many ways, but in the news clip, it meant looking for something. Rescue teams are going through the debris to find survivors. Survivors, people who lived through the storm. Debris, we will talk about in the next one. In the picture, a raccoon is going through the trash to find food. Debris is the next one. I know it ends with an S, but we don't pronounce it. Debris. Pieces of broken things that are left after a disaster. The streets were filled with debris after Hurricane Helene passed through. An open fire. Take a look at the picture. That is an open fire. You can imagine without power or electricity, no one would be able to run their stove or oven. Without those stoves or ovens, people would have to cook their dinner over an open fire. Let's get the official definition. A fire that is burning without any covering. Some people were cooking on an open fire after their homes were damaged.
After Hurricane Helene left torrential flooding and landslides like this one in Boone, North Carolina in its wake.
My car's gone.
Residents scrambling this morning to locate loved ones as the search and rescue mission intensifies across parts of the southeast.
Torrential, very strong and heavy, usually about rain. Torrential rain from Hurricane Helene flooded many homes. Landslide. Take a look at the picture. That is what a landslide is. Literally, when land is sliding down a mountain. When dirt and rocks fall down a hill. The heavy rain caused a landslide in the mountains near Asheville.
After Hurricane Helene left torrential flooding and landslides like this one in Boone, North Carolina in its wake.
My car's gone.
Residents scrambling this morning to locate loved ones as the search and rescue mission intensifies across parts of the southeast.
This can be a little difficult. In its wake. You might hear, oh, wake up. I wake up at 7 every morning. This is a different kind of wake. What is left behind after something has passed? Take a look at that picture. A boat is going by in the water. The waves behind that boat are called its wake. Here is a sentence using wake. The hurricane left destruction in its wake. Scrambling. This is never good. Moving quickly and in a hurry because of panic. Maybe you are late for work and you are scrambling around. I will use it with an English phrasal verb, you are scrambling around the house trying to find your phone and your keys. Here's a sentence at the bottom of the screen. People were scrambling to leave their homes when the flood waters started rising. I want to talk about two different terms, search and rescue and search and recovery. Search and rescue is a lot better than search and recovery. What is search and rescue? Teams that look for people who are in danger and try to save them. Rescue, save, both mean the same thing here. Search and rescue teams are working day and night to find survivors. Search and recovery, not so fun. That usually happens a couple days after a disaster when they don't think survivors will be found. They are just recovering bodies. Teams that look for people who have died. After a few days, search and recovery teams began finding victims in the debris. I am recording this English lesson only a couple days after Hurricane Helene went through Asheville, so I think search and rescue teams are still out trying to find survivors. In a couple days, those search and rescue teams will be called search and recovery. It is always sad when that name changes.
Residents scrambling this morning to locate loved ones as the search and rescue mission intensifies across parts of the Southeast. The collision of these two homes among the horrific and widespread destruction across 6 states, flash flooding and mudslides devastating the mountains of western North Carolina.
Collision. In the news clip, 2 houses collided. That's the verb, collide. The noun is collision. When 2 things crash into each other. The verb is collide. There was a collision with 2 houses in the river during the storm. Horrific. It's an adjective. Describes something very bad and shocking. The horrific damage from the hurricane shocked everyone in the community. There's that word again, community, like town, city, neighborhood. Those are all types of communities. Flash flood. I'm hoping you know what a flood is, but what's a flash flood? A sudden flood that happens quickly after a lot of rain. A flash flood swept through parts of Asheville after the torrential rain.
Flash flooding and mudslides devastating the mountains of western North Carolina. The former bustling town of Chimney Rock now turned into rubble. The residents there vowing to rebuild.
The next one is rubble. Rubble. It's a lot like debris. Broken pieces of buildings or structures. People were searching through the rubble to find their belongings. Very sad. Belongings means things they own. Vowing. It's a really strong promise. In the picture, let me make that a little bigger. In English, we say people make their wedding vows. It's like a promise to love each other until death do them part, we say. Vowing, promising strongly to do something. The mayor is vowing to rebuild the town after the hurricane.
The former bustling town of Chimney Rock now turned into rubble. The residents there vowing to rebuild.
The life in Chimney Rock is strong, okay? Like the rocks, boulders may be moved, but we will come back together.
Survivors of the storm growing more desperate for food and water since Helene barreled through.
This is a great phrasal verb to know. Barreling through, moved through quickly and with great force. If you look at that picture, you could say that that train is barreling through town. Barreling through is not always a bad thing, but of course here it was a bad thing. The hurricane barreled through Asheville. Here's a sentence. The words are on the screen. Hurricane Helene barreled through the mountains, leaving destruction behind We could also say leaving destruction in its wake.
Survivors of the storm growing more desperate for food and water since Helene barrels through.
We haven't had power, water, very low on food.
Gas lines a mile long.
We are continuing to ramp up pushes of commodities, particularly water and MREs, as well as fuel and other resources into the impacted communities.
Ramp up. In the picture, it's a ramp. It's like flat stairs. If you had a wheelchair, you could get up a ramp. You probably could not get upstairs. But what does the English phrasal verb ramp up mean? To increase or get stronger. The rescue efforts ramped up as more people were found missing. Commodities. Commodities are basic goods like food, water, or fuel. After the hurricane, commodities like water and gas were hard to find. We could also say they were scarce or they were in short supply. MREs. That is an acronym. The M stands for a word, the R and the E. What does it mean? Meals ready to eat, usually given during emergencies. The military will also use MREs when fighting in a battle. It's food that is really easy to prepare. The National Guard, we will talk about them in just a minute. The National Guard distributed MREs to people who couldn't cook after the storm.
We haven't had power, water, very low on food.
Gas lines a mile long.
We are continuing to ramp up pushes of commodities, particularly water and MREs, as well as fuel and other resources into the impacted communities.
Hundreds still unaccounted for, like Julie LaRoe.
If anybody's seen her or knows anything, please let somebody know.
She and her fiancé, John Norwood, sought shelter at a neighbor's house when Helene hit, but a mudslide took out the home.
We looked outside and there was a 30-foot tall wall of water and rocks and tree debris just coming at us, and it just knocked the house straight down with all of us in it, and we all got washed down river.
John's legs crushed by ceiling rafters. Rescuers using a pulley to bring him to safety over rushing floodwaters. Julie hasn't been seen since.
I crawled around screaming, looking for her, and I just couldn't find it.
This is just heartbreaking. It really makes you want to cry after watching John. John's wife is unaccounted for right now, unfortunately. Yeah, I messed up there. John and Julie were not married yet. She was his fiance, so they had promised to get married. I do have some bad news. Shortly after I filmed this English lesson, Julie's body was found. She did not survive. Yeah, it's just, it's horrible. Hopefully his wife will be found. He looked pretty banged up. That's an English phrasal verb we could use. He had a lot of cuts on his face, but took out is another English phrasal verb. Here it means to destroy something completely. The hurricane took out several bridges, cutting off access to the town. We'll talk about cut off really soon. Crawled around, another English phrasal verb. In the picture, that baby is crawling, not walking. John was crawling around after the flood came through. It means to move on hands and knees slowly. Rescue workers crawled around the rubble looking for survivors.
Thousands of National Guard members have been activated, racing to get supplies to the region. FEMA handing out food and water, defending its response to the disaster.
We have continuously been moving resources into those impacted areas since the storm has passed, but we know that there's a lot of need.
We talked about the National Guard already, but we haven't talked about what it means. A group that helps during emergencies like storms or floods. The National Guard is part of our military. It usually focuses on protecting people in this country, they are not full-time. Most members of the National Guard have other jobs that they do full-time. They are only called up. That's the English phrasal verb. They are only called up when they are needed, like during emergencies. The National Guard arrived to help with the rescue efforts after the hurricane. A lot of states have their own National Guard, and you can see that truck says the North Carolina National Guard. They are distributing supplies to the people who need it. We have another acronym here, FEMA. What does that stand for? The Federal Emergency Management Agency, which helps people in the U.S. during big emergencies. FEMA sent aid to the areas hardest hit by the hurricane. In the news clip, they said that some people think that FEMA is not doing enough. They're not working hard enough. They're not doing it quickly enough. Here's a sentence. Some people say that FEMA isn't doing enough, or they are working too slowly. I mean, just my opinion here, but it's a big storm. A lot of people need help. Unfortunately, it is going to take time to get help to everyone who needs it. We saw the same thing after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. It was a big, devastating storm, and it took FEMA a long time to help everyone. The city of New Orleans was impacted the most by Hurricane Katrina. I mentioned cut off earlier. It means when a place is separated and no one can get in or out. In the picture, it looks like flooding has destroyed that bridge, so cars and trucks are no longer able to travel over that bridge. Let's use cut off in a sentence. Many towns were cut off from help after the roads flooded.
We know the Air National Guard has been working with FEMA. They've brought in more than 100,000 pounds of food and water. They know they need more as quickly as possible. They also plan to open more distribution centers for people who are cut off. In the meantime, President Biden is expected to touch down in North Carolina tomorrow.
Touch down. Another English phrasal verb. When something like a tornado or a plane lands on the ground. In the news clip, they said the president would be touching down in North Carolina in a few days. Here is an example sentence using touchdown. It's not actually true, just an example. The eye of Hurricane Helene touched down just outside Asheville. By the time Hurricane Helene went through or barreled through Asheville, it was no longer a hurricane. The winds were not that strong. It was the rain that devastated so much. In this English lesson, we will take a look at a news clip from a hurricane that hit the United States just a few days ago. This is the second English lesson I have done on Hurricane Helene. It is one of the biggest hurricanes to ever hit the United States. When I made that English lesson a couple days ago, the death toll, which I talked about, it just means the number of people who have died. The death toll was unfortunately at 150 people. Now, as I record it, it is at 232 people. 232 people have died as a result of this storm, and we will talk about 5-6 of them today, including the couple in the picture. Unfortunately, they did not make it. That is another way to say they died. This English lesson will be helpful for anyone who is going to take the IELTS or TOEFL exam. When you watch the news in English, they often use more formal language than everyday English speakers. Or maybe you just want to improve your English conversation. Let's take a look at a clip, and then I will come back and teach some English.
We begin with hope fading right now in the ongoing search for survivors in the Southeast as Hurricane Helene's death toll continues to climb.
For each term or idiom or English phrasal verb, I will have a picture, I will have the official definition, and then I will use that term in a sentence. The first one is hope. You will hear native English speakers say this all the time. Sometimes they change it a little bit and say hopefully. Hopefully means things in the future will be good, we hope. Let's look at the official definition. Believing that good things will happen. John Savage, that is the guy whose grandparents passed away. John Savage had hoped that his grandparents were safe before the tree fell. Yes, so sad. A tree fell on their house. They used the verb crushed. It crushed them. Fading. Now in that picture, I have what I think is a very nice image. There is a sunset and light is going to be fading away in a few minutes. What does fading mean, or fading away? Slowly disappearing. As the sun dips towards the horizon, light will start fading. Let's put together our two first words and use them in a sentence. Their hope was fading after they saw the tree crash into the house. In an article I read about that elderly couple, Jerry and Marcia, it mentioned they had a grandson. His name is John, and I'm sure that he hoped his grandparents would be okay, but when he got to their house and he could see that a tree had fallen on their house, I'm sure his hope faded of finding them alive.
We begin with hope fading right now in the ongoing search for survivors in the southeast as Hurricane Helene's death toll continues to climb. Ryan Smith at the live desk with the grim new details tonight.
Grim indeed, Dee Dee. More than 200 people now confirmed dead in the aftermath of Helene. The youngest victims right here, these newborn twins who were found with their mother crushed by a fallen tree out of Thompson, Georgia.
Ongoing. I'm not proud of this picture. I really couldn't find a great picture to help you understand what this word means, but hopefully the definition will help. Still happening. Not finished. The search for survivors is ongoing after the hurricane. And with that picture, I thought we could say that cleanup from the hurricane is ongoing. I will use a sentence about you. I applaud you in your ongoing English learning. You're not going to quit English learning. You are going to continue to learn English. Applaud was a word we use in a previous English lesson. In that sentence, it just means like, I'm saying good things about you. It comes from applause. In the United States, when we think somebody did a good job, we will clap for them, like if they're performing on stage or something. So many of the words that we will use today are sad, but this one is a good one. Survivors. Survivors. People who stay alive after something dangerous. There are many survivors from the hurricane, but some people did not make it. Again, if somebody didn't make it through the hurricane, it's a very nice way to say they died. They used climb in the news story. I wanted to talk about this one because it has a silent B. Climb. It means to go up something. Rescuers had to climb over fallen trees to reach the house. But we could also say the death toll is continuing to climb. The number keeps getting bigger.
We begin with hope fading right now in the ongoing search for survivors in the southeast as Hurricane Helene's death toll continues to climb. Ryan Smith at the live desk with the grim new details tonight.
Grim indeed, Dee Dee. More than 200 people now confirmed dead in the aftermath of Helene.
Grim. This whole English lesson seems to be a bit grim. It's another way to say very serious or sad. The news about the storm victims was grim. Victims and survivors are not exactly the opposite. Victims could mean people who have died, but it could also mean people who have been hurt. And I tried to pick a very grim picture. You can see there is a lot of damage done to the houses. There isn't a lot of green there. Everything is sort of brown. Even the weather is grim. The sun is not shining. One of the news reporters said, Indeed.
Grim indeed, Dee Dee.
Indeed is a very formal way to agree with somebody. It just means really, truly. It was indeed a very dangerous storm that caused many deaths. If you want to be very formal and agree with someone, let's pretend you are eating dinner. The friend you are eating with said, "This is a great meal." You can say, "Indeed, it is a great meal." If we were in England, I might say, "That sounds posh. That sounds very fancy." Indeed.
We begin with hope fading right now in the ongoing search for survivors in the southeast as Hurricane Helene's death toll continues to climb. Ryan Smith at the live desk with the grim new details tonight.
Grim indeed, Dee Dee. More than 200 people now confirmed dead in the aftermath of Helene. The youngest victims right here, these newborn twins who were found with their mother crushed by a fallen tree out of Thompson, Georgia. A tragically similar situation unfolding in Beach Island, South Carolina, where we have learned a tree fell on the home of this elderly couple. Marcia and Jerry Jones were found dead, hugging each other in their bed.
Confirmed. Confirmed means said to be true for sure. You will often hear this term in tragedies when they are talking about deaths. Something like, there have been 200 confirmed deaths as a result of the storm. Let's put a sentence on the screen and read that. It was confirmed that 200 people died because of the hurricane. They also use aftermath. Aftermath, the time after something bad happens. Aftermath is never a good thing. In the aftermath of the storm, many homes were destroyed. This is tragic. This is super sad. Newborn, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a baby that has just been born. They talked about newborn twins. Let's use an example sentence that isn't so grim. The family was relieved to find the newborn baby safe after the hurricane. Twins. What are those? Two babies born at the same time. If they are identical twins, they look exactly like each other. Here's an example sentence using twins. There were twins in one of the families affected by the storm. If you are finding this English lesson useful, do you mind hitting that like button? It helps other people find the English lesson. If this is your first time here or you've never subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe so you never miss another English lesson.
Grim indeed, Dee Dee. More than 200 people now confirmed dead in the aftermath of Helene. The youngest victims right here, these newborn twins who were found with their mother crushed by a fallen tree out of Thompson, Georgia. A tragically similar situation unfolding in Beach Island, South Carolina.
Okay, this one was really tough. There were like 4 difficult words all in a row, so I thought, let's just put them all together and talk about them. Tragically similar situation unfolding. That is quite a mouthful. What does it mean? Well, tragically means sad. Similar means almost the same. Situation is just like a thing. And unfolding means it's happening. Let's look at the official definition. Another very sad thing happening in the same way. In a tragically similar situation unfolding nearby, another family lost their home to a fallen tree. And it gets worse. We'll talk about this more at the end of the English lesson, but another hurricane is heading towards the same area, or at least parts of the same area. Just in case you don't know about the geography of the United States, like where these states are located, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, I will put up a picture of where those states are. And below those states is another state, Florida. Florida is known for having a lot of hurricanes. They were hit by this hurricane, Hurricane Helene, and then a little later, we'll talk about another hurricane that is headed their way. Elderly. They called that couple, those two people, elderly. What does that mean? Very old, but in a nicer way. The elderly couple, Marcia, that's how you pronounce that name, Marcia. They mispronounced it in the news story. Marcia and Jerry died when the tree fell on their house.
The youngest victims right here, these newborn twins who were found with their mother crushed by a fallen tree out of Thompson, Georgia. A tragically similar situation unfolding in Beach Island, South Carolina, where we have learned a tree fell on the home of this elderly couple. Marcia and Jerry Jones were found dead, hugging each other in their bed. And in a final act of heroism, Jerry rolled over to try to protect his wife. Search and rescue operations still happening tonight in the most remote areas of the storm-ravaged communities.
Heroism. Heroism is the next word. Sometimes I have trouble saying this word, so I often avoid it in my everyday conversations. We've talked about heroes before. Those two words are very much related. But heroism, that means brave actions to help others. The firefighters showed heroism by saving people during the storm. We have an English phrasal verb next, and like so many English phrasal verbs, this can be used in a few different ways, but in the news clip, they used it like this: to turn your body from one side to the other. That man is rolling over in bed. Maybe he is trying to get more comfortable. And Jerry rolled his body over to cover his wife in order to protect her. Here is the sentence. Jerry rolled over to protect his wife when he heard the tree snap.
Tragically similar situation unfolding in Beach Island, South Carolina, where we have learned a tree fell on the home of this elderly couple. Marcia and Jerry Jones were found dead, hugging each other in their bed. And in a final act of heroism, Jerry rolled over to try to protect his wife. Search and rescue operations still happening tonight in the most remote areas of the storm-ravaged communities. Survivors now stepping in to pitch in, distributing food and water and working through the day to clear mountains and mountains of debris.
The next one is remote, but they did not use remote like this in the newscast. We'll talk about that next. But you may know this definition of remote: a device used to control the TV from far away. You don't have to get up off the couch to change the channel. I don't know if this is true in your house, but it's true in mine. We always lose the remote control in my house. We often find it in the couch cushions. But in the newscast, they used it differently, like a remote area. That means a place far away from towns or cities. Let's use remote in a sentence. They lived in a remote area where help took a long time to arrive. Ravaged. That means destroyed badly. The hurricane ravaged their town, leaving many homes destroyed. I've used damaged and destroyed in this English lesson. Let's talk about the difference. A damaged house can be repaired. A destroyed house needs to be rebuilt.
Search and rescue operations still happening tonight in the most remote areas of the storm-ravaged communities. Survivors now stepping in to pitch in, distributing food and water and working through the day to clear mountains and mountains of debris.
Another English phrasal verb, two, right in a row actually. Stepped in means helping when someone needs it. Neighbors are stepping in to help families affected by the storm. I mean, you could step in a puddle. That is totally different. You might hear stepping in to help. Speaking of helping, you might hear pitch in. Helping with small tasks. On Saturday mornings at my house, everyone pitches in to help clean the house. We do that so one person doesn't have to do all of the work. Let's use it in a sentence. Everyone in the community pitched in to clean up the damage. I'll say this next one a couple times because it might be hard to pronounce. Distributing. Distributing. Giving out things to people. Volunteers. Maybe we should talk about that word. Those are people who are doing things, but they're not getting paid to do it. They are giving their time. Volunteers often pitch in to help. Volunteers are distributing food and water to people who lost their homes.
Survivors now stepping in to pitch in, distributing food and water and working through the day to clear mountains and mountains of debris.
We know we have pockets of people who are isolated due to landslides and bridges out.
In the news clip, they said pockets of people. That might not make sense if you only know this definition for pockets. Pockets are small spaces in your pants to hold things. Jim put his car keys and phone in his front pockets. The man is pulling out his front pockets to show he has nothing in them. It doesn't look like he has any money. But in the news clip, they said pockets of people. Very different from pockets on your pants. Pockets of people means small groups of people in different places. There are pockets of people in remote areas who still need help after the storm. See what I did there? I used a couple of our terms together. If you watched the last English lesson I did about Hurricane Helene, you met a man named John who was looking for his fiancée, Julie. At the time, we didn't know if she was dead or alive. Unfortunately, a couple days ago, her body was found. She did not make it through the storm. And just when you thought things couldn't get worse for this area, another hurricane. Hurricane Milton. Weather reporters are predicting Hurricane Milton will probably hit Florida in the next couple days. Let's take a look at that sentence and then we'll talk about a couple things. Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall on Wednesday as a Category 5 hurricane. To make landfall means when the hurricane goes from the water to the land. There are 5 different categories for hurricanes. Hurricanes that are Category 1 means the winds aren't that strong. I mean, it's still a hurricane, so it's a storm, but a hurricane that is Category 1 is not as bad as a hurricane that is Category 5. There is no Category 6. But with Hurricane Helene, the winds weren't the problem. It was the heavy amounts of rain that caused flooding. Yeah, this hurricane looks like it is going to be a doozy, which is another way to say it looks like it's going to be a big problem. If you would like me to do an English lesson about Hurricane Milton after it hits, maybe we could say the aftermath of Hurricane Milton, please let me know in the comments. Let's talk about what we know about Hurricane Helene a couple weeks after the hurricane hit. Hurricane Helene, which hit just before Milton, has killed more than 230 people, with many still missing. The states most affected by Helene were the Carolinas, that means North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Rescue efforts are still happening for both storms. That is one of the scary parts about this storm. There are so many people living in remote areas that nobody is exactly sure of the death toll from Helene, even though we are a couple weeks away from that storm. In today's English lesson, we are going to look at a news clip about a hurricane that is currently heading towards the state of Florida. Just a couple hours ago, I put up a poll asking which English lesson would you like to see next. I thought France stopping weapons going to Israel would be number 1, but no, the hurricane that is heading to Florida was the winner. So let's get right into it. I will show a short clip of the news and then I will come back and I will teach you all of the English you will need to know for your next English conversation, or maybe you are taking the TOEFL or IELTS exams.
Big national story where tracking Milton has downgraded to a Category 4 hurricane as it heads toward Florida's west coast.
One of the difficult terms they mentioned in the newscast was tracking. For each of these words, I will have an official definition. I will use it in a sentence, something relating to Hurricane Milton, and I will also have a picture that I hope helps explain the difficult term. Tracking. Tracking, what does that mean? Following the path of something. Experts are tracking Hurricane Milton as it moves towards Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is a city in the United States that could be damaged the most by a hurricane. It sits pretty low. It sits pretty close to sea level, and experts are really worried about something called a storm surge. We will talk more about that later. If you look at that picture, it has nothing to do with hurricanes, so I want to teach you another example of how we use tracking in English. It looks like that picture was taken at the gym. That person could be tracking their workouts. Maybe they are tracking how much food they eat every day. Maybe they are tracking how much weight they have lost. They also mentioned downgraded. Now, in the picture, it says upgrade. You hear that quite a bit. Let's say you have an older phone and you want to upgrade it. It's just another way to say you want to buy a better phone, a newer phone. Downgrade, when it comes to hurricanes, it means they're not as strong anymore. To reduce the strength or importance of something. Hurricanes have 5 different categories. A hurricane that is category 1 has winds of about 74 miles per hour. I don't know what that is in kilometers per hour, so I will put that on the screen somewhere. Category 5 is the strongest hurricane. Category 5 hurricane has wind speeds of 157 miles per hour. There is no category 6. Hurricane Milton was a category 5 hurricane at one time, but it was downgraded to a category 4. It might even be downgraded to a category 3. But experts warn the winds are not what you have to be worried about. Yes, a little bit, but it's that storm surge. Hurricane Milton was downgraded from category 5 to 4 as it reached Fort Myers. Fort Myers is another city in Florida. We also talk about patients in a hospital. You might hear them in critical condition or stable condition. If a patient gets sicker in the hospital, their condition might be downgraded. A quick favor. If you are learning any English from this lesson, would you mind hitting that like button? And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe so you never miss another English lesson.
Big national story where tracking Milton has downgraded to a category 4 hurricane as it heads toward Florida's west coast.
Well, it's expected to weaken to a possible category 3 storm upon landfall. Officials say that the effects could still be deadly and destructive.
Meteorologists, those are people who try to predict weather. Meteorologists will name these hurricanes, and you may be wondering, how does a hurricane get its name? Let's talk about it right here. Hurricanes are given names to make them easier to talk about. The names come from a list created by the World Meteorological Organization. That is tough to say. Meteorology is the study of weather. Meteorologists predict weather. Study weather. These names alternate between male and female and are reused every 6 years. If a hurricane is very bad, its name is never used again. You might also hear that name has been retired. I have a couple other English lessons on this channel about Hurricane Helene that hit the United States just about 2 weeks ago. Some parts of the United States that were hit by Helene will also be hit by Hurricane Milton. But Hurricane Helene did so much damage that name will never be used again. It will be retired. And there you have the list of storms all the way up until 2029. Let me get rid of my picture. And you can see 2024, there is Helene, and down a little further is Milton. They are also named in alphabetical order from A to, well, it looks like W there. There are no storms that begin with Z. There was one year where there were so many storms, they ran out of letters, so they started using Greek letters like alpha and beta.
Big national story we're tracking. Milton has downgraded to a Category 4 hurricane as it heads toward Florida's west coast.
Well, it's expected to weaken to a possible Category 3 storm upon landfall. Officials say that the effects could still be deadly and destructive. Connor Hansen joins us live now from Tampa, Florida with the latest on Hurricane Milton.
Melvin, good morning. As you mentioned, even with that hurricane downgrading to a Category 4, possibly a Category 3, experts are warning, do not downplay this extremely dangerous hurricane because that storm surge is already on its way.
In the news clip, they also mentioned weekend. Weekend. Almost like this. Weekend. But it's not. It's different. Let's talk about what this weekend means. Made less strong. The storm weakened slightly before hitting Tampa Bay, but it remains dangerous. And there in that picture, you can see that person is very weak. They cannot lift a lot of weight. The opposite of weakened is to strengthen. Luckily, the hurricane is not gaining strength. It's not becoming stronger. You might know this one. The weekend. What is the weekend? It's the end of the week. The end of the week. It says it right there. Weekend. Saturday and Sunday. Hurricane Milton is expected to hit over the weekend, causing major disruptions. That sentence is not actually true. It is expected to hit either Wednesday night or Thursday morning. Destructive. What does that mean? Causing great damage. Milton is a destructive storm, leaving widespread damage in Fort Myers. Tampa Bay, Fort Myers, Sarasota, those are names of cities that could see damage from Hurricane Milton. Got a couple other words that sound like destructive. Destructive is an adjective. Destroy, that is the verb, and destruction is the noun. Hopefully Hurricane Milton will not destroy too many buildings in Tampa Bay. Hopefully the destruction in Tampa Bay will be minimal. It's another way to say there won't be too much of it. I hope this is not true. Hurricane Milton destroyed many buildings. Downplay, to make something seem less important or not as bad. Officials warned residents not to downplay how destructive Hurricane Milton could be. I will use downplay in an example that doesn't have anything to do with a hurricane. Let's pretend I got into an accident. Maybe I damaged my car, but I didn't destroy it. It can be fixed, but there is a lot of damage. I have a wife. Her name is Jamie. Let's say after I got into my accident, I gave her a call and told her I had been in an accident. But maybe I downplay it. Maybe I say, oh, it's not too bad. It won't take a lot of money to fix, even though it might take a lot of money to fix. I'm downplaying it so she won't worry as much. When I get home and she can see that I'm okay and the car is not too bad, I can explain the real story to her. That way she won't freak out too much while we are talking on the phone.
Connor Hansen joins us live now from Tampa, Florida with the latest on Hurricane Milton.
Melvin, good morning. As you mentioned, even with that hurricane downgrading to a Category 4, possibly a Category 3, experts are warning, do not downplay this extremely dangerous hurricane because that storm surge.
I've mentioned storm surge already, but the news just mentioned storm surge. Let's talk about what that is. A rise in water from the ocean caused by a hurricane. In the picture, you can see what a storm surge is. So meteorologists are saying even though the wind is slowing down, that storm surge is going to be huge. And since Tampa Bay is such a low city, it could really do some damage. A dangerous storm surge is expected along the Gulf Coast as Milton approaches, as it gets closer. Later on, the newscast will mention where the Gulf Coast is located, and I'll have a picture for you. We'll talk all about it in just a little bit.
As you mentioned, even with that hurricane downgrading to a Category 4, possibly a Category 3, experts are warning, do not downplay this extremely dangerous hurricane because that storm surge is already on its way, and so will the extreme winds for a wide swath of Florida.
A wide swath. It's not easy to say. A wide swath. It's another way to say a large area. Hurricane Milton could impact a wide swath of Florida, including Tampa Bay.
Because that storm surge is already on its way, and so will the extreme winds for a wide swath of Florida. You can see the waterfront here behind me. Some areas could hit a 15-foot storm surge. That means where I'm standing could go underwater.
We've got a big one coming.
Hurricane Milton is barreling towards the west coast of Florida.
Barreling towards. I believe we talked about this one before when we talked about Hurricane Helene. It means moving quickly and forcefully. In the picture, I would call those things rockets, missiles, maybe bombs. Recently, I did an English lesson about missiles barreling towards Israel. They were sent by Iran. Let's look at a sentence that uses barreling towards. The storm is barreling towards Fort Myers, expected to hit by midnight. Now, Hurricane Milton hasn't made landfall yet, but the news story talks about making landfall. So let's talk about what that is. When a storm reaches, take a guess, land. All hurricanes start in the water. Hopefully the hurricane stays in the water and never makes landfall. But unfortunately, we know Hurricane Milton will make landfall. We just don't know exactly when or exactly where. Well, according to this example sentence, Milton will make landfall near Tampa Bay with high winds and flooding.
We've got a big one coming.
Hurricane Milton is barreling towards the west coast of Florida. The powerful storm could make landfall either late Wednesday or early Thursday, possibly striking the region between Tampa Bay and Fort Myers.
There's going to be impacts far beyond wherever the eye of the storm is.
The eye of the storm. If you notice in that picture, there is an arrow and it is pointing at the eye of the storm. It is the calm center of a hurricane. Yes, that is pronounced calm. That means there is no wind blowing in the center of the storm. There is no wind blowing in the eye of the storm. The eye of the storm passed over Fort Myers, offering a brief moment of calm. Calm. I mean, there might be an L pronounced there, but there's not much of one. Calm.
There's going to be impacts far beyond wherever the eye of the storm is.
Officials say this could be a once-in-a-century storm, expected to bring intense winds and life-threatening storm surge that could reach 15 feet in some areas.
They are calling Hurricane Milton a once-in-a-century storm. We are getting quite a few once-in-a-century storms, like almost every year. But let's talk about what a once-in-a-century storm is. It's a storm that happens very rarely. A century is 100 years. Meteorologists. Not easy to say, right? People who try to predict the weather. Meteorologists are calling Milton a once-in-a-century storm due to its strength.
Officials say this could be a once-in-a-century storm, expected to bring intense winds and life-threatening storm surge that could reach 15 feet
in some areas.
We've got buildings that are over 100 years old. They've never seen this kind of wind.
Businesses across mandatory evacuation zones have already shuttered.
Two words that might be difficult here: mandatory and evacuation. Mandatory means something you have to do. Evacuation means you are leaving an area. Let's look at the official definition: a forced order for people to leave an area. Now, in the United States, officials can't really force people to leave an area before a storm, but if there is a mandatory evacuation, it basically means if you stay, there isn't going to be anyone around to help you because we're all leaving too. If you decide to stay, you are on your own. A mandatory evacuation was issued for Tampa Bay ahead of Milton's arrival. We are going to talk about two types of shuttered. That one, which is how they use it in the newscast, and this one. Shuttered means to close something, often for protection. A lot of houses near where I live have shutters on the window. They are just for decoration. They don't really shut to protect the windows, but I think it's different in Florida. They might actually use their shutters to protect the windows from breaking, but shuttered means to close. Shops in Tampa Bay shuttered their windows in preparation for the storm. But shuttered can also mean to shake or tremble in fear. I'm sure this is happening to many people in Florida right now, unfortunately. Residents shuddered in fear as the winds of Milton intensified. They got stronger. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully everyone that was in Tampa Bay has left. You can also find all of the definitions and the example sentences in the description below, just in case you want to study these words while you're not watching the video. You could copy and paste them into a document. Some people have asked, why don't you just give out a free PDF with all of those definitions? I mean, I might someday, and if I do, I will want your email, and then I can send you information on my course, which doesn't exist. Not sure if I will ever do a course. But if I do, I will send out a free PDF and get your email address. Now back to why you clicked on this English lesson: to learn English.
We've got buildings that are over 100 years old. They've never seen this kind of wind.
Businesses across mandatory evacuation zones have already shuttered. Walt Disney World, Universal Orlando, and SeaWorld are closing Wednesday. Long lines of traffic are now the theme on highways and outside gas stations as people continue to flee, but pumps are running dry.
I mean, this thing petrifies me.
Flee. What does flee mean? Written that way, we have a couple different types of flees in English, but that way means to run away from danger. Now, in the sentence, I changed flee to the past tense. Thousands of people fled Fort Myers to escape the coming storm. We have a couple words in this newscast that mean scared. Here's another one: petrified. It means extremely scared. Many residents were petrified as Hurricane Milton approached the Gulf Coast. And if you notice, when the news story talks to real residents, like not reporters, they have a pretty strong Southern accent.
I mean, this thing petrifies me.
Major Florida airports have also suspended commercial travel. Those who got on last-minute flights out Tuesday are counting their blessings.
I'm lucky that I got on this flight.
They also talked about suspended commercial travel. What does that mean? Suspended means to stop for a short period of time. And commercial travel, it's just like the opposite of private. These are big airplanes, not like really small, expensive ones that might seat only 5 or 6 people. Commercial, the big airplanes. Stopped travel for a short period of time for safety reasons. If they terminated travel, that means they would stop forever. Airports in Tampa Bay suspended commercial travel as the storm grew stronger. We've talked about destruction already, but what's widespread destruction? Damage over a large area. I hope this sentence doesn't come true, but it looks like it will. Milton caused widespread destruction along the Gulf Coast, leaving many homes damaged. We have been talking all about the Gulf Coast. Let's take a look at a picture of the Gulf Coast. You see that big circle there? That is the Gulf Coast. You may be able to see Cuba, Florida, Mexico there. That piece of water is called the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf Coast is the land surrounding the Gulf of Mexico. Let's get an official definition. The coastline along the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico is preparing for Hurricane Milton's arrival, especially near Tampa Bay.
Those who got on last-minute flights out Tuesday are counting their blessings.
I'm lucky that I got on this flight.
And just 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene caused widespread destruction, there's a rush to clear debris left over from that storm to prevent it from flying.
And around 6 million people who live along Florida's Gulf Coast had been ordered to evacuate, officials hoping they would have left yesterday. Jen, Melvin.
Connor, what have you been experiencing in terms of the way people are preparing? I know they're boarding up their homes. They've likely, hopefully evacuated in those zones. And then the gas lines, too. I know of a number of gas stations, I think 1,000 gas stations have completely run out.
That's true. There was a huge rush on those gas stations as millions of people tried to get out of this region.
A huge rush. Look at that picture. There are a lot of people trying to put gas into their vehicles. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I would love to live in Florida, the beaches, the sunshine. But when I see people having to evacuate, trying to get gas, not being able to get gas, the long lines on the highway to get to safety, I suddenly don't want to live in Florida anymore. I live many, many miles away from hurricanes. I live in a part of the country where we get a lot of snow and it's cold in the winter. I guess I will take that weather over hurricanes. A big rush is a large number of people doing something quickly. There was a huge rush to buy supplies before Milton hit Sarasota. We haven't talked about Sarasota yet, but that is another city that could be hit by Milton.
I know of a number of gas stations, I think 1,000 gas stations have completely run out.
That's true. There was a huge rush on those gas stations as millions of people tried to get out of this region. But we are hearing the Florida Highway Patrol is actually going to be escorting fuel trucks into this area to those gas stations along those busy evacuation routes. So hopefully that'll help after the storm passes when people badly need that gas.
Escorting. Take a look at the picture. Police cars are escorting that gas truck. It means accompanying someone or something for protection. Police were escorting evacuees out of the storm zone to safer areas. Evacuees, those are people who are evacuating. Look at this picture. There could be a very wealthy man there. Maybe he has a lot of money and he needs protection. Security guards are escorting the wealthy man to the bank. Maybe he's going to the bank to get even more money. And this is a tradition in the United States. It doesn't always happen, but brides, those are women who are about to get married. Brides are often escorted by their fathers down the aisle when they get married. Yeah, she doesn't need protection as she's walking down the aisle, but that's the term we use. Let's get up to date on Hurricane Milton. Right now, the death toll from Hurricane Milton is at least 17 people in Florida. The storm caused a lot of damage, including tornadoes, floods, and power outages, affecting, let me get rid of my picture, affecting millions of people. Congratulations, you made it to the end of a really long English lesson. I am sure your English is better now than it was before the lesson. Maybe you're not done. Maybe you like really long English lessons. Right down there is 3 more hours of English learning. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time.